Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Twisted Tentacle Inn. I am your innkeeper, Vase Odin, and with me today I have...
Ooh, Nate, lost in time and space. Nice to be on your channel, Vase.
Feels weird doing this the other way around. Usually you introduce everybody. So for those of you who don't know, I'm part of the Great Old Ones Gaming, and we are a network of content creators that kind of focus on horror games and such. And Nate is kind of the mastermind behind it all.
I don't know about mastermind, but certainly the guy that does all the editing work, that's for sure.
So at the Great Old Ones, we do a lot of reviews for different games, mostly horror and mostly specifically Lovecraftian horror games. And we do a lot of Delta Green reviews, and some of you have watched some of my Delta Green videos and really want more. And we do have more. I do a lot of Delta Green stuff with the Great Old Ones. More specifically, I do, my channel now has shifted to more D&D, but I still do a lot of Delta Green stuff with the Great Old Ones. And the Great Old Ones has a YouTube channel, and in it, we've posted reviews for a ton of scenarios for Delta Green, including individual reviews for each scenario within the brand new book, Black Sites. And it's a collection of scenarios for Delta Green, the role-playing game. So today I thought that I would post a video on the channel kind of giving a summary of all of them. And then you guys can, if you want to watch a review for a very specific one, you can go on to the Great Old Ones Gaming podcast channel or the Great Old Ones Gaming podcast if you just like listening, and listen to them individually. And I'll link all of those down in the video description below. So without further ado, and after my long intro, Nate, let's go ahead and just kind of give our brief ideas and thoughts on each scenario within Black Sites.
Absolutely. So we get to start off with one of my favorites, which is PX Poker Night. This operation sees the agents at a decrepit Air Force base when an unknown military vehicle arrives and madness ensues. And right from the get-go, I love the plot. I love the unnatural threat that comes in this scenario. I think the player characters are really well fleshed out, and I mean, this scenario was just so much fun to run. It's got a lot of great scenes in it that I really enjoyed.
I agree with you. I liked it. I think it's in the middle for me in terms of versus other Delta Green scenarios, but I think it's one of the best scenarios you can use to introduce new players to the game. They have very interesting characters, some of the most well fleshed out characters I've seen in any role-playing game. The events that occur in it are really interesting. So overall, definitely, you know, I had a few minor issues with it, but overall enjoyed it quite a bit as well. And then we have Kaligati is the second scenario that's in the book. Kaligati basically is a military operation. You are in Afghanistan slash, where are you? It's Afghanistan and
Iraq, I believe.
Turkey, or yeah, you're like in the border of several countries actually. Yeah. But a Delta Green operative goes missing, and then you're sent in as Delta Green agent into this base that is in the process of being going away. Basically, everybody is being moved out of this base, and it's basically a skeleton crew. But Delta Green agent has gone missing, and now you must find them. And eventually you go through the desert and have to deal with not just insurgents that are part of this Afghan war that's always going on, you know, terrorist groups, and then also dealing with a small village that you run into that has some very strange rituals and very strange goings on. Kaligati is an action-packed scenario. I think it's one of the most action-packed scenarios for Delta Green. If you like combat, if you want to deal with a lot of killing and blowing stuff up, Kaligati is the scenario you're going to want to play.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this scenario, more than others, really exemplifies the combat rules in Delta Green. It really puts them on a showcase in a really great way. There's a couple of great scenes that the players can go through that have the combat be the centerpiece, and it's awesome.
It was so much fun. Yeah, there's a lot in that one for sure. So that's one that is pretty high up there for me. I guess we can give our rankings at the end of this.
Mm-hmm.
and kind of show which ones we like the best, and so on and so forth. But next up, we have The Last Equation. So what is this one about?
So this operation starts off with a man committing a mass murder. He goes into a family's house and commits a murder, and it makes the evening news across the nation. And the investigators are sent in to investigate and cover up any potential unnatural incursions surrounding this murder. And eventually, the players they'll be stationed up in New Jersey, and they'll be doing an investigation through New Jersey and New York about a former grad student who comes across this equation that he says solves all of the world's problems and then some. It's like the solution to everything, and that this revelation drives him mad.
Yeah, and anyone who figures out or solves this equation, it seems to be going mad. So you're sent in as Delta Green agents to try and figure out why and to try and contain it, so no one else can figure it out.
Yeah. This operation is interesting. There's a lot of open-endedness on how the equation actually functions and what it does, and there's a lot of really neat scenes that the handler can run their players through that I liked. Not going into any spoilers about the contents of those scenes. If you want to go into the full review, be sure to check out the YouTube channel. But this operation provides a lot of really awesome moments for handlers to run their players through. It has a lot of interesting and well fleshed out NPCs that are a lot of fun to roleplay, particularly the news reporter, probably my favorite character in that scenario. There's a couple good action scenes, and I think this one, more than others, is probably one of the easier scenarios to introduce newer players to.
Yeah, and even though it's easier, it's very unique. It has kind of a villain in a way, is this number, and it's not something you can fight. So it creates an interesting dilemma for the agents and how they're going to deal with it. So I think it embodies what Delta Green is all about. I really, really enjoyed that one. And next up, we have Lover in the Ice. This one is crazy. Lover in the Ice. So this one, in the middle of a major snowstorm, you're sent in to try and contain. Delta Green has these containment units called the green boxes, and that's where they keep like all this unnatural stuff or artifacts that might be dangerous, and they contain them in these green boxes. But this storm seems to have damaged the structure of one of the green boxes, or the storage unit where the green box was. And something seems, and you're sent in to catalog everything, make sure nothing's missing. And then when you get there, you realize that something has gotten out. and oh my God, is it crazy. The creature in this one, this is more like
this is a Monster of the Week story.
Yeah, Monster of the Week, a creature feature type thing. But the creature in this one is so horrific. It's so like graphic.
Yeah, that's putting it mildly.
Yeah. It's, if you really want to gross people out and just horrify them in a different kind of way, that's not like creepy crawly. It's just like, one of those things you don't even want to look. This is the one for you. So Lover in the Ice is another one that's kind of like a fairly casual, fairly, like you said, Monster of the Week, just a run-of-the-mill Delta Green, solid Delta Green scenario.
Mm-hmm. I do like that this scenario plays on the weather, I think, more than I think a lot of like other scenarios in general in any game system really plays on. Since this takes place in a storm, the players are going to have to really take care of that and, make sure that they have the right provisions and everything, which I appreciate personally.
Yeah, there's that added element of having to deal with that, which makes it far more interesting than if it was just a monster running around town killing things. Next up, Sweetness. Sweetness is a shorter scenario, another kind of Monster of the Week scenario, right? Yeah,
kind of. This scenario is more about a person than it is about a place or an event. This This operation sees the investigators, or sees the agents investigating a former Delta Green operative who has gone missing after it was after a racist, like a hate crime against her family or her former family. I'm trying to
Potentially, yeah,
yeah.
Someone, yeah, it's her ex-husband and the kids, and potentially it was some kind of a hate symbol or something was spray painted on their front door. So, but there's the symbol itself is probably connected to something occult, and that's where Delta Green, it flags it for Delta Green, and they send the agents in to check it out.
This scenario, I think, is a interesting showcase on how agents can develop in Delta Green. All right, there's that very common trope where, you know, if you're not the agent, you're the operation.
Yep. At some point, if you're in Delta Green for too long, eventually you become the operation. And this is a perfect, like you said, perfect showcase of that.
I think this scenario is really good for smaller playgroups. I think 2 to 3 people, I think, would be ideal for this one. So the other ones we've talked about, you could easily run with a larger group, but this one feels a little more intimate, and I think that's a good thing because we've had a lot of other scenarios that have bigger playgroups in mind, and this one can be a nice, quick 2-player side mission or something like that in a campaign.
Definitely. Next up, Hourglass. Hourglass is about a town in Oregon, which is where I live, small Oregon town called Hourglass. And a woman, there's a viral video of a woman in a park full of people, and she's screaming and rambling, and she just vanishes into thin air. And someone took a cell phone video of it, uploaded it, and it went viral. And Delta Green immediately gets to work on that to see if it's a hoax and all that. And when they realize that this is most likely a real video and not a hoax, they send in agents to find out what happened. And as soon as the agents arrive, they find out that this small town is just like a lot of small towns, a highly religious, insular group. And the police department is kind of weary and doesn't really trust the agents. There are other elements as well, like a drug family in the town. Lots going on. It's a very open-ended scenario, very sandboxy. Could lead to a very long, several session long scenario, or it could end up being very short. And if it's very short, it's more than likely because all your agents are dead.
Yeah.
What do you think of Hourglass?
This is definitely one of the more deadly and longer, like you said. It's the sandbox of the book, and that comes with its pros and its cons, depending on your play style and your play group. Hourglass has a lot of interesting aspects to it. I think handlers could certainly lift elements from if they don't like the scenario. One aspect that I really liked that you had touched on is the meth family. Robinson is this, drug family that can kind of come out of nowhere and be a real thorn in the side of the investigators or the agents. This one is, I think, and I think you would agree with me, probably the weakest in the book.
Yeah, I do agree with that.
So, I mean, every book is going to have, one scenario that ends up at the bottom. So that's just kind of what this scenario is. But
Agreed.
There is a really cool tie-in in this scenario into the next scenario, Ex Oblivione.
And Ex Oblivione is a really cool scenario that takes the agents into Yuma, Arizona, and they are investigating a murder of a family. So an entire family gets murdered, and it's a military family, but there are symbols painted on the wall, and of course instantly flags Delta Green to come in and find out what that's about. If there's any relation to any obscure or supernatural element, Delta Green arrives and are thrust into a much deeper conspiracy than they expected. So the family is murdered, and instantly the agents are thrust as they go deeper and deeper into a conspiracy that actually may involve Delta Green's darker past. And agents themselves are put into a position where now that they know some things that they maybe shouldn't know, how are they going to handle that, knowing that they're part of this organization that maybe has a slightly darker past than they anticipated. But in addition to that, they do have some other supernatural elements to deal with when they get there, and they do have to contain and do their Delta Green thing with it. So it's a multi-part scenario that can lead to some interesting dynamics and role-playing opportunities for the agents that go into it. What do you think of Ex Oblivione?
As a player, this scenario was a ton of fun. There was a lot of really cool cool things that happen that I'm not going to spoil. You should definitely play this one. That's all I'm going to say.
And it's got a lot of action, too. It's a good mix of investigation, roleplay, and action. It's got, like, all three things in it.
Yeah, definitely. That was something I was pleased with as a player. We had a pretty diverse group of agents that went through this operation, and we each had our own moments, which I think is difficult to write in a scenario, especially like Delta Green as a game that kind of focuses on a group of particular skill sets and sends them off into an investigation.
Yeah. I've run this one twice for two different groups, maybe three times, but yeah, each time that I've run it, it's been a blast. So definitely high up there as well. So now, and there's one other scenario that's not really a scenario. It's called a 2-minute horror, and it's called The Child. It's also in this book, and it should be mentioned because Delta Green does offer these 2-minute horrors kind of sprinkled in. Sometimes they'll throw them out for free on their website, or, they'll just come up with it on their Patreons. And some of them are pretty interesting, but basically what a 2-minute horror is, it's just a seed. It's like a story seed where they present you with the situation, and then it's up to you as the handler or your play group to develop that into something bigger. And it can eventually lead to a bigger either campaign or a bigger scenario. So the 2-minute horror for The Child is introduced in this book. And I think I'm glad they threw it in there, even though it's not a full scenario, because it does at least introduce the 2-minute horror to people who are not as familiar with it for Delta Green. So do you remember what the Child is about?
Yeah, so the Child scenario seed is essentially the player comes back from a mission or is driving down the road, and they just happen to find this child who is covered in dirt and just looks like they've been living on their own for months at this point, and they kind of attach themselves to whatever player the handler chooses, and that's kind of the whole story. When the player goes to try to pawn the child off to an organization, they say no. And if they try to contact Delta Green says, well, this is your problem now. You're going to have to deal with it. And there are some interesting elements that the players can find out, which we won't spoil. We talked about that in our Sweetness review. But I really like the concept of this, but I think this one more than others is going to be difficult to implement in larger games.
Yeah, I agree. You mentioned it in the review because it puts too much attention on one player. So you want to implement this in a group that's much smaller, and people are going to be more okay with that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, cool. All right, so now that we've kind of given a brief description and our thoughts on each one, let's rank them. What are your rankings?
Well, let's start from the bottom, I guess. My least favorite operation in this book is probably Hourglass. It doesn't have a lot going for it, and it's very difficult to run because it's going to require a very extensive reading, probably multiple read-throughs, to really get a grasp of everything that's going on. It does have some interesting NPCs that are pretty well fleshed out, and there are some cool moments in it, but yeah, for me, this is the least exciting in the entire book. And then from there, I would say probably Sweetness. While it does showcase the aspect of the agent's deterioration while they're in Delta Green, this one it's not great for larger player groups, and this one's pretty short, so there isn't a lot to it, just in general. And I guess the child is kind of sandwiched in there as well. I don't really know how to review that since it's not really a scenario.
Let's not rank that one since it's not really, like you said, not really a scenario, right?
Yeah. And then as far as top 4, after that, I'd say Last Equation. That one can be a little difficult to run as a handler. I think it's pretty easy to play as a player, but as a handler, you have to... There's a lot of moving pieces you need to keep track of, and they're very time sensitive. So that one can be a bit challenging as a handler, but I do think that there's a lot of really interesting elements in that scenario that are worth playing. From there, I would say Lover in the Ice. I love a good Monster of the Week story. And let's see, this is a big toss-up. In no real order, I would say PX Poker Night, Ex Oblivione, and Caligati.
Nice. So all 3 on the top kind of tied with each other. Huh?
Yeah.
Very cool. So for me, I'm with you. Hourglass is my least favorite of all of them. And like you said, I think it's complex unnecessarily. It is unfortunately difficult to pull off properly. And then also there's not enough there to warrant a longer dragged out scenario. So unfortunately, I think that it falters in that a little bit. And just like you, above that one, I would say Sweetness. Just like you said, it's not that it's bad, it's just short, and there's not a whole lot of meat to that one either. It's the opposite of Hourglass. It's shorter, it's short, it just happens and it's done. Whereas Hourglass can be very long, but with not a whole lot happening in between. But both have good elements to them. So still, anything Delta Green, like I've said before, is going to be good. At least the bar is, way higher for Delta Green. So after Sweetness, this is where it gets tough for me, because all the others are just so good.
Yeah,
I think. I think I would put Lover in the Ice next. I love the Monster of the Week element, the weather situation. It's a very interesting scenario. The graphic nature of the creature is awesome. It may turn some people off, but I loved it. But I think what brought that one down a little bit is there is an element of there's a handout that's like 5 or 6 pages long. It's long and it's dragged out. And there are other elements when they first get to the green box that can lead to side things that can kill agents unnecessarily that have completely nothing to do with the scenario. So I think that brings it down a peg. So Lover in the Ice is going to be the next one. The following one, now this is where it gets really tough. I guess Ex Oblivione. I think Ex Oblivione does a great job with the 3-act structure of a scenario. It's presented in a very solid story format, and I really enjoy it. Then after that one, I would say it would be PX Poker Night, only because of a couple of things that I didn't care for when, and I'm not going to spoil it, but you can hear about it in the review. But overall, it's a great scenario, especially awesome as an introductory scenario for new players. I think the NPCs are done right. It has a lot of tables and charts that really help run this very smoothly, very well laid out. So in terms of layout, it's top notch. After that one, I would say Caligati. Yeah, Caligati. And then Caligati, because the action scenes in it are great. It's got a really interesting setting. You don't get to go to other parts of the world in Delta Green that are so remote like that. So that was really cool. And then the ending town. I like that it's not a town that you start in. I like that it's in the 3rd act when you finally reach the town. It really gives me this movie vibe of the 3rd act of a film when the agents arrive at the town and then things are crazy. So I really enjoyed that one. And then, of course, on top, for me, it would be The Last Equation. I think The Last Equation, completely opposite from Hourglass in terms of how it delivers its sandbox format. The Last Equation is a sandbox just like Hourglass, but I feel like The Last Equation is a sandbox done right. They handled it really well with some very interesting characters, really cool developments in the story that keep it interesting, despite the fact that it's such a big sandbox. So there it is. That's my list.
Interesting.
Yeah. Slightly different than yours, but the same. We put the same 2 on the bottom.
Yeah, it seems like I like the more action-oriented scenes, and I do think we would probably agree that Last Equation is good. I don't know, it's definitely not my favorite, but
yeah, it's that's the thing. After the bottom 2, the others are really hard to rate because they all have such awesome elements to them.
Yeah, totally.
Cool. Well, so you heard our brief review of all the scenarios in Black Sites. And if you want to really hear in-depth, spoilered discussions on these because you're a handler and you're going to run them, not because you're a player, then check out all the individual reviews, which I'll link in the video description below. And check out our other reviews. We have some Call of Cthulhu reviews. We've been going through the Mansions of Madness book, and that's been really interesting. And I don't run Call of Cthulhu regularly, so it's been cool to kind of read through the scenarios and see how that game lays out its scenarios. So check all that out on the Great Old Ones Gaming podcast website and the Great Old Ones Gaming YouTube channel. And I think that does it for today.
I think so. It's warm out, man. Let's go sit in the AC.
Right? All right. Well, I've been your innkeeper at the Twisted Tentacle Inn, and with me today was...
I was special guest Nate, lost in time and space.
All right, guys. Thank you very much, and check in anytime. I'll talk with you then.